Kemi Badenoch's attempt to pin down Keir Starmer yesterday on defence spending should have been an easy win. The figures announced of £13.3 billion in extra defence spending were already being questioned by economists, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and even members of Labour's own government. And I presume she'd had a message to this effect and been told this was the thing to go for. This was what would make Keir Starmer look foolish. The issue of where the money is coming from, particularly the suspicion that it might be drawn from the aid budget or the cost of the Chagos Island settlement, it's a valid line of attack. Yet Badenoch, not for the first time, mishandled it, and rather than hammering home the contradictions, she floundered, she misframed her question, she allowed Starmer to pivot into a smug dismissal, and her reliance on prepared scripts, her lack of agility in the Commons, left her sounding repetitive and uninspired, not for the first time. She had an open goal. Labour's defence figures were unravelling in real time, and it's become much clearer today with Healy going around the morning breakfast time television studios. But instead of pressing on the inconsistencies, she clobbered on and then whinged about getting a patronising put down. Starmer's response, brutal in its simplicity, was telling, "I'm going to have to let the leader of the opposition down gently." She didn't feature in my thinking at all. It's not so far removed from David Cameron's line about what was the patronising thing that David Cameron said? Anyway, it's gone. Don't worry, my dear, or something like that. In other words, Badenoch is not a threat. Worse, she's not even an obstacle. In fact, Starmer is actually looking happy at Prime Minister's questions because each week he knows that he can come in and look better. It's extraordinary. The leader of the opposition makes Starmer look good. In a period where the Conservative Party is desperate for a post-Sunak identity, Badenoch's leadership feels like an extended holding pattern, a sort of suppressed fart, rather than a dynamic opposition. You can see the buttocks clenching, can't you, with that effort to avoid embarrassment, and there she is, all over the chamber, a patterner of embarrassment, a patterner of regret. She's locked herself into a predictable groove. Outrage about woke issues, rhetorical flourishes about Western civilization, and these broad brush attacks on Labour's economic policies, and none of it cuts through, none of it means anything, and none of it is done with any degree of finesse. Her rigid, plodding delivery, this voice she seems to assume, and the tendency to circle back to the same issues as if she's not got enough written down in front of her, makes her easy to dismiss. And Starmer has learned the pattern of her questioning and preempts her lines of attack with offhand derision. And at PMQs, that's fatal. A leader needs to be flexible, sharp, and capable of seizing the moment when the opportunity is there, when the opponent is on shaky ground. Starmer is on shaky ground week after week, and Badenoch doesn't seem able to score one single blow. Not one. She seems unable to deviate from her pre-rehearsed lines, from that voice. And Badenoch's biggest issue is existential. What does she stand for? What is she there for, except to fill a hole? Who is she speaking for? What kind of Conservative Party does she think she's leading? So far, she has attempted to make a virtue out of vagueness. But voters and even her own MPs are starting to tire of this. You can't build your career or your platform on a vacuum. Her broad pitch has been that the Conservative Party needs time to reflect on what went wrong, to rebuild trust in 2025, then establish credibility in 2026. But all she does is rehash the stuff from her own time in government as a bobbing minister. In a corporate boardroom, this 2025-2026 2027 with firm policies. That might sound like a reasonable strategy. In the brutal theatre of British politics, it sounds complacent and weak. It sounds dithering and vague. It sounds vacuous. She's giving voters nothing to engage with, no battles to rally round, no clear differentiation from Labour beyond culture war posturing. And even when major economic concerns are on the table, such as the collapse in business confidence under Labour, she's failed to make that her focus. Instead, her shadow business secretary, Andrew Griffith, has been left to do all the heavy lifting on the economy, while Badenoch drifts into tedious abstractions about Western civilization. The person who got the cheer yesterday was Rishi Sunak, and I'm not surprised. Rishi Sunak, followed by Jeremy Hunt, the man who made spoonerism popular again. It's extraordinary to see those two standing up after Kemi Badenoch. And you think, what? You know, they weren't great, but they were better than this. A fundamental role of the opposition is to define the government in the public's mind. Margaret Thatcher defined Labour as economically incompetent. Tony Blair painted John Major's government as tired and sleazy. David Cameron successfully sold Labour's 2010 platform as reckless overspending. Badenoch, in contrast, fails to impose any strong narrative on Starmer's government at all. Starmer is there to impose the narrative, and he bobbles along, and Badenoch can't even skewer that. She occasionally lands glancing blows on Labour's economic credibility, but they're never sustained. Her modus operandi is to complain about being patronised, rather than effectively attacking Starmer's policies. Of course she's patronised because she's useless. And her defenders may say she's fighting an uphill battle, but effective opposition leaders create their own momentum, and she has the momentum of a full stop. Her PMQs are actually not even a full stop, a semicolon. In normal life, I love a semicolon because it indicates that you've reached an end of your sentence, but you haven't quite finished. But in real life, to be identified as a semicolon means you don't quite know when to stop. You don't know quite when to start. You're a sort of unexplained pause. Her PMQ performances reveal Starmer doesn't take her seriously. Why should he? No one else does. His tone towards her is the same kind of dismissive scorn that he reserves for a particularly obtuse barrister. It's that kind of perception is politically lethal. In a time when the global right is shifting away from diversity and inclusion policies, Badenoch ought to be a key figure in countering the straight, white, male, contemptuous image of Trumpism. Instead, she's managed to make herself appear the feeble alternative, despite her frequent complaints about being patronised. Her problem isn't that she's a woman of colour leading the Conservatives. Her problem is that she's not convincing as a leader of opposition, as a leader of anything. Her problem is that she is not a person of substance. While right-wing populism is rolling back DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion policies in business, Badenoch has failed to position herself clearly in this debate, if that's what we want. She can't even do that. She's dabbled in arguments against DEI, but in an incoherent manner. She calls diversity policies poison, yet her own party's equal opportunities document has her face on the front. She's failed to articulate a vision for what diversity should look like in a centre-right party, but beyond vague posturing. She could own this if she actually did the work and learned how to present herself at PMQs, but she doesn't. She doesn't do the work because she takes... I think it's as if she takes advice from Liz Truss. If she were a serious political operator instead of a gap filler, she would understand that Britain is too multicultural for a full-scale rollback of diversity policies. We don't want that. Why would anybody want that? We want to embrace the future, not live in some sort of vague 1950s past. Instead, she offers contradictory messaging, simultaneously denouncing diversity while relying on her own identity as proof that the Tories are inclusive. This muddled approach leaves her vulnerable to attacks from all sides. Diversity is not the issue at the moment. Diversity is a race that has been won. The more important issues are issues about cost of living, issues about moving forward in an increasingly treacherous and uncertain world. And she can contribute to that, but she doesn't. If there was a time for Badenoch to make an impact, it was this week. And the government's defence spending plans were clearly exaggerated. The issue of the Chagos Islands funding was murky, and businesses are increasingly alarmed by Labour's policies. This was the moment to go in hard. Instead, she was dull, predictable, and easily brushed aside. Her strongest line of attack should have been, Labour's numbers don't add up. Where is the money coming from? Is it the aid budget? Is it hidden in the Chagos Islands settlement? The Prime Minister refuses to say. Instead, she asked about figures that had already been explained, giving Starmer an easy opportunity to ridicule her. And she deserved every bit of that ridicule. This is what makes her leadership so uninspiring. This is why she is so useless. She has good material. Her SPADs undoubtedly have given her good material, but she delivers it poorly. And she clings to the script because she doesn't dare to deviate, because she knows she hasn't the mentality or the confidence to go off-piste. She has a potentially potent criticism of Labour's economic and defence policies, but it turns into a weak, directionless, scolding session. Like somebody draining out, like somebody wringing out the dishcloth. And she has a unique position as a black, female, conservative leader in an era dominated by white, male politicians, and yet she does nothing dynamic with it. She is an embarrassment, and she needs to go as fast as possible. Badenoch's time as leader of the opposition is shaping up into a study of political inertia. She does nothing good for the Conservative Party. She does nothing good for Parliament. A good Parliament, a good government, is one that is held to account by a good opposition. We've seen what happens when a poor opposition is in power. It allows the nonsense of the last government to drip out week after tiresome week. And it looks as if we are replicating that, but just flipping the sides. What's the point of that? A good government is kept in place, is defined by a good opposition, and Badenoch isn't doing the job. And actually, Starmer is one of the weakest leaders that Britain has seen, and he looks good in front of Badenoch, and that's inappropriate. She has neither the strategic acumen nor the rhetorical sharpness to land serious blows on the Prime Minister. She has no defining message, no vision for her party's future, no ability to speak, to shift the public debate in her favour, to question what is going on. Worse still, she is not feared, she is not respected, she is mocked, she is not even tolerated. When that happens to an opposition leader, the countdown to her replacement should have begun. I would love to know how many letters are already waiting with the chairman of the 1922 committee. Because if they're not already piling up, then the Conservative Party is doomed, and rightly so.